On the 8th of March 2022, fast food icon McDonald's announced that it would be temporarily closing all of its 850 outlets in Russia. In Russia, McDonald's is a direct employer of the people working at most of its restaurants and has said that it will keep all of its 62,000 employees on full salary. I think that this is a generous act of a company which is showing corporate responsibility. I need to point out that the business model of McDonald's is that it is a real estate company where it rents prime locations with good footfall to franchisees who then operate McDonald's restaurants. This is not the case in Russia, where most, but not all, restaurants are directly operated by the company itself. Other companies in this business, such as Burger King, do operate on a franchise system, and this makes it far more difficult for them to pull out because of international contractual arrangements with their franchisees. The first McDonald's location opened in Pushkin Square in the heart of Moscow. As I see it, there could have been no better location in the USSR. The monument of Pushkin is an iconic location for first dates, and it has something literary, liberal, modern, and opening up to a new world about it. Or at least that's how I see it. Bringing McDonald's to the Soviet Union was like bringing a piece of the United States to the communist country. But in fact, it wasn't a piece of the United States, but a piece of Canada. The Soviet operation was managed by the Canadian branch of the company. The idea apparently went back to the 1976 Toronto Olympics, when something easy and fast but seemingly good quality was sought for the Moscow Olympics, which were due to be held in 1980. However, another invasion, this time of Afghanistan, and the sanctions that followed put a stop to all that. However, once Gorbachev came to power and the USSR started to open up, plans for McDonald's were revived. In 1988, the company applied for permission to open a branch in Russia. Permission was granted. Legend says that Gorbachev himself promoted the idea. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But on the 31st of January 1990, the first restaurant opened. An advertisement had been placed in the Moskovsky Komsomolets daily for staff. 30,000 people applied and only 600 were chosen. So 1 chance in 50 of getting a job at McDonald's. But those that were chosen were clearly going to be the best, as I shall tell you about my own experiences. There were huge queues on opening day, which can be seen in the photographs from the McDonald's Corporation, which I'm using during this video. I have heard, but cannot quote the source, that on opening day at McDonald's in Moscow, this was the most people served in a restaurant on one day in history. And the photographs shown here from that day illustrate the point. There were people standing in line for hours to get a burger and some chips, or should I say fries, to use the American word. Another thing that amazed the locals was that the restaurant didn't run out of food. Now, this was a common problem in communist countries where food queues were the norm rather than anything else. However, I need to point out that McDonald's did have something rather communist about it. It ran at a loss for a long time. It was a prestige location. It was something that looked good for the corporation. So that allowed it to run at a loss and to be subsidized from outside. I was in Moscow for the first time in October 1992. Even after nearly 3 years of operation, and by then with competing outlets, it was packed at the weekends with long queues to get in. But during the week, it was a bit easier. Sometimes a little bit of a queue, and other times I remember once just walking into it. Now, what I distinctly remember is the service was like nowhere I had ever been. And for that matter, with 30 years nearly of hindsight, I can say I have never had such service anywhere. The staff would shout that the cash till was available, so diners would know to go and get up. The order was, and when they went to make the order, they were greeted by a happy, smiling face. And this is the exact opposite of what had happened in communist countries in the past. And sometimes they even told us to go and sit down, and they brought it to us. So it was, and the staff were really, really wonderful. It was great. Now, one of the requirements for the staff was that they had to keep smiling for the length of their shift, which probably isn't very easy, knowing that you've got to keep smiling no matter what. Now, there were hamburgers in communist countries. It's nothing all that unusual. For example, I used to frequent a place that was opposite the railway station in Gdansk, and I have no doubt that people in the USSR had eaten a piece of meat inside 2 pieces of bread. But what made it different was that atmosphere. I suppose McDonald's would argue it was the taste. At the weekend in Moscow in the early 90s, there were queues. Now, one incident that happened to me was I was out with a friend and her brother and his girlfriend. It was decided that we would go to McDonald's. I mean, where else would you go when you're taking a girl out? But the queue was over 2 hours to get in. Outside the McDonald's in Pushkin Square, there were these portable barriers of the type that's sometimes used in crowd control for people waiting in queues. Now, I think on those barriers it was written the approximate waiting time. I think maybe I've got that wrong, but in any case, we sort of knew how long approximately we would have to wait. There were these youngsters who would get around the queue, and they offer their services to get the food in. So they probably knew someone in the kitchens and worked with them. So while we were parked in Pushkin Square, one of these youngsters, I would say aged around 14, took our orders. We had to wait quite a long time. And just as we thought that he'd run off with our money, he turned up breathless with our order. Now, I do need to point out that today I wouldn't do something like that because I'm really opposed to corruption and using money to get an advantage over somebody else. I think that is absolutely wrong. But anyway, I did it then, and maybe because I was with the others, or maybe they put me up to it, whatever. I don't know what my excuse is now. Anyway, I'm opposed to corruption. So I'd continue to go to McDonald's in Russia because it was a good place to meet people of the country gender. Later, I preferred sort of Russian-style places, such as, for those of you who know them, Teremok or Mumu or Yolki Polki. Around 1992, I recall an article in the Times in the UK comparing wages in many countries and suggested a good way of comparisons was to see how long people had to work to be able to afford a Big Mac with fries and a Coke. Now, the article argued that McDonald's was a good measurement as it's the same everywhere. It also showed that Russians had to work much longer for their treat. Indeed, the aforementioned snack could cost between half a day to a full day's wages for most people at that time. Following the invasion of Crimea in 2014, McDonald's closed its outlets on the peninsula, citing banking difficulties. Now, this led to some oligarchs around Putin to invest several million euros in a Russian version of it. McDonald's continued to grow throughout Russia, even after the invasion of Crimea and the aggression against Ukraine. On the 13th of May 2015, it opened its 500th restaurant in Yekaterinburg. We can see in this photograph the opening for the first McDonald's restaurant in Novokuznesk in Siberia on the 16th of December 2015. The opening ceremony was attended by McDonald's president in Russia, Kamzat Kazbulatov, and McDonald's franchise partner, Alexander Govor, as well as the lady politician on our right, who is the deputy governor of the Kemerovo region for industry, transport and business. On the 31st January 2020, for its 30th anniversary, the company chose to celebrate by offering hamburgers with their original 1993 ruble price tag. Then in January 2020, it was worth less than 1.5 cents. Obviously, it's worth a lot less now. However, this was at the time when COVID was beginning to threaten, and the company feared that it might pose a health hazard, so that anyone who turned up got coupons instead, which they could use later. Let's have a quick look at some publicity for McDonald's in Russia. Here's something for the 2018 World Cup when Croatia played England, and I'm glad to say that the team I was supporting on that day won the match. Here is something for Russia Day with the suggestion that one goes to McDonald's for an ice cream to celebrate. So we have McDonald's using patriotism to further its own bank balance, whilst Putin, of course, does exactly the same thing, only he uses nationalism and extreme nationalism to further his bank balance. And I suppose one could say, well, this is what it's all about. At a time when Putin's imperialism has drawn the same veil over Europe as has the imperialism of his predecessor Stalin, then the closing, let's hope temporary, of McDonald's will mark the descent of a new Iron Curtain. Now, not just obviously the closing of McDonald's, but everything that Putin is doing and the sanctions and the pullouts that follow. To commemorate the descent of this curtain once more, on the last day that McDonald's was open in Russia, there were long queues to get served. Unlike my experience nearly 30 years ago with the youngster getting the food by having a contact in the kitchens, Russians could order online, but even via auction websites. You can buy McDonald's food now via the likes of eBay, for example. As this new Iron Curtain descends, Russians can see economic prosperity as something in the past and a new return to the communist type of dictatorship that they endured for so many years. But they will, of course, be able to look at a map showing the territorial advances of the Putin regime. So let's hope that that makes it all worthwhile. Thank you very much for listening. I upload every Friday at 8 o'clock in the evening. I normally do stuff related to the Third Reich more than anything else, but this obviously is more of an economic thing once more, and I hope you'll forgive me for this. I was the publisher of a business magazine once upon a time, so I think some of the things I actually say that might be coming out. If you subscribe, you'll know when uploading material. During the current crisis, I'm doing this on the 9th of March 2022, then I'm going to upload several times a week, if not every day, trying to cover things related to what's happening now in Ukraine. When this ends, I shall go back to the way I was doing it beforehand, concentrating largely on things related to the Third Reich and publishing on a Friday at 2000 hours Central European time. That's my time. All the best from me.